In light of the recent incredible news that Kathleen Kennedy is leaving Lucasfilm, she sadly was never fired after 10 years of destroying the company and running it deep into the dirt 6 feet under. She took an iconic film franchise and turned it into something that you wouldn't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. It's something that nobody wants to watch anymore. Star Wars films used to be an event that you would look forward to for years to see in the theaters, and now there's a new Star Wars show on TV every Tuesday, and it's the worst thing on TV, and nobody watches it or talks about it. Kathleen Kennedy had a bad addiction of announcing Star Wars movies. The Star Wars movies would never come out, but every Tuesday she would announce a new Star Wars movie that was never going to come out. So I thought I would look at all the movies that she had discussed and she had announced over her 10-year tyrannical reign of Lucasfilm. There were 15 movies in no particular order. A Rian Johnson trilogy. Back before The Last Jedi had even come out into theaters, she announced that Rian Johnson was going to make a trilogy of movies of whatever the fuck he wanted. She never really had any plan or leadership or any sort of narrative for what pathway she wanted the movies to go. She just sort of let the directors of the trilogies to just be like, hey, make whatever you want. And then she gave Rian Johnson trilogy and just said, whatever you want. We love Rian Johnson, whatever he wants. And then The Last Jedi came out. And a lot of people, critics, audiences, a lot of people hated that movie. And she just sort of never discussed his trilogy again. I'm very curious whatever would have happened with the Rian Johnson trilogy. Every couple years, someone would ask her, like, hey, is that still coming out? And she would say, oh, yeah, that's still coming out. Until about the final 5 years. After the rise of Skywalker in the 2020s, it seemed like she kind of just, like, left from the internet. She stopped going to Star Wars Celebration. She stopped going to D23. You didn't see her. She'd still be behind the scenes announcing movies and making shitty shows, but you wouldn't see her because she knew that the audience and the public wasn't a big fan of her. So she had the 3 Rian Johnson movies that never got made. The 4th film that never got made before the Boba Fett TV series, which is probably one of the worst shows I've ever seen in my life. Before that TV series came out, she had a Boba Fett movie that she announced, directed by James Mangold, the director of Logan. He was supposed to make this film. It never came out. I was somewhat excited for it at the time, but I always felt like Boba Fett was a character who was really cool in like the limited time that we gave him. And I felt like once you expand upon these characters that are like cool in the background, cool in these short moments, then you kind of ruin the character, which is what she did with the show. But the Boba Fett James Mangold movie never came out. That was the 4th film that she had announced and never came out. The number 5, again, these are in no order. Patty Jenkins' Rogue Squadron. You remember they filmed this whole skit of Patty Jenkins on like a runway with the X-Wing, getting into the X-Wing fucking pilot seat and everything like that. They filmed that whole skit. The movie never came out, kind of went away. I think part of it had to do with Wonder Woman 2 being a bag of shit. The movie never happened. A Jabba the Hutt movie was announced. A Jabba the Hutt movie. I also don't like when there's villains that get their own solo movie announced, and you just know they're going to take this villain and turn him into a good guy, like they did in the Boba Fett show. Boba Fett kept acting like he was this gangster and this criminal, but all he ever did was like nice things and good things and hang out with a Hot Topic crew. The Jabba the Hutt movie, I can't imagine how bad that would have been, but she announced the Jabba the Hutt movie. The showrunners of Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones ended shortly. They wrapped the shit up on that show. They sped through the final 2 seasons because they were going to make a Star Wars trilogy, she had announced. Benioff and Weiss were going to make a Star Wars trilogy. So they sped through Game of Thrones, gave us a bad final season, and then they never made their trilogy. What would the trilogy have been on? I don't know. There was a Rian Johnson trilogy announced, a Boba Fett movie announced, Patty Jenkins' Rogue Squadron, Jabba the Hutt, and then a Benioff and Weiss trilogy. So that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 now. 10th film announced by Kathleen Kennedy. This is the 10th film in 10 years, was a Kevin Feige Star Wars movie. This is the head of Marvel. Kevin Feige was going to make a Star Wars movie. Don't know what it's about. I doubt she knew what it was about. She just kind of said, hey, do you want to make a Star Wars movie? Do you want to make a Star Wars movie? Do you want to make a Star Wars trilogy? Let's do it. What is it about? You let me know. Kevin Feige's movie never came out, of course. I'm curious what it would have been. Nobody probably knew. Kevin Feige never knew. He probably didn't even know that it got announced that he was going to be making one. The 11th film announced by Kathleen Kennedy was a Taika Waititi directed Star Wars film. This one actually seemed like it was close to actually happening. It had a release date, I remember, even though it never really went into production. But I remember she gave it a release date. It seemed like maybe this one might actually happen after 10 failed attempts at making a movie. It seemed like the Taika Waititi one had some possibility. Ended up never coming out, of course. They parted ways, creative differences, whatever, like she had with every other director she ever worked with. And Taika Waititi went on to make Thor 4, which I hated and fell asleep in. This is a throwback. Episode 9, before J.J. Abrams came in at the last moment and made Star Wars Episode 9, one of the worst movies I've ever seen, J.J. Abrams' Star Wars Episode 9. Colin Trevorrow was supposed to make Star Wars Episode 9, Duel of the Fates. There's like a plot synopsis of what Colin Trevorrow's script was, and it actually sounded really cool and interesting. I'm sure it would have sucked. I'm not a fan of Colin Trevorrow as a director, but I think it might have sucked less than J.J. Abrams' Rise of Skywalker. Not that there would have been any saving that sequel trilogy at all, but at one point Colin Trevorrow had a written script for Star Wars Episode 9 Duel of the Fates before Kathleen Kennedy fired him. Let's not forget, Lord and Miller had a Han Solo film that they were deep into production on. They were filming, and then Kathleen Kennedy came in, fired them because she wasn't on the same page as her director. Shocker. Creative differences like she's had with every director she's ever worked with. She fired him. Ron Howard comes in and remakes the Han Solo movie before it comes out. And Lord and Miller's Han Solo movie never ended up coming out. And the 15th film that Kathleen Kennedy announced, this one is up in the air. It may happen, it may not. I would bet on it not happening. I would hope it doesn't happen because I've never been a fan of this character. But Rey Skywalker, Palpatine, whatever, Kathleen Kennedy says she's going to make a solo Rey film, which is going to act as a Star Wars Episode 10. I don't know why you would make this. You need to stay away from these characters from the sequel trilogy. The sequel trilogy was awful. Rey wasn't a good character. She was a complete copy ripoff of Luke Skywalker. She wasn't original. If you think Rey was a good character, you probably didn't watch the original trilogy. The original trilogy starts out with Luke Skywalker, an orphaned character who doesn't know his parents, grew up on a desert planet, wishing to one day leave the planet, then discovers he has force powers, gets a fucking blue lightsaber, and battles a black Sith. And then Rey is an orphaned character on a desert planet, doesn't know her parents, always dreams of leaving the planet, and then one day discovers she has force powers. It's the exact same thing as fucking Luke. She is a complete copy of Luke Skywalker. Except she's able to do everything easier than Luke ever was, and she's stronger and more powerful than Luke ever was. Those are the 15 films in Kathleen Kennedy's 10 years of her tyrannical reign of Lucasfilm that she announced that never came out. Which film would you have wanted to see the most on that list, and which film would you have wanted to see the least? For me, the one I would have wanted to see the most, even though I hated the sequel trilogy, Star Wars Episode 9 Rise of Skywalker is one of the worst big budget Hollywood films I've ever seen, and I would have been very curious to see Colin Trevorrow's Episode 9 Duel of the Fates. That's probably the one I'd want to see the most, and the one I'd probably want to see the least is this Rey movie that may or may not happen, probably won't happen. Let me know. Peace.